Hi boys and girls. Today we're going to read about one of my favorite composers, Johann Brahms. He was born in Germany in 1833. He died in Austria in 1897. And here's a caricature of him. Johann Brahms did things other people might have wished they could do. He fell asleep once when Franz Liszt, who was a very famous piano player at the time, was playing for him. He dressed strictly for comfort, and when he would leave his clothes on the floor when he went to bed. He liked merry-go-rounds, he liked circus sideshows, and not until he was almost 30 did he stop playing with tin soldiers. And there was a reason for that. Because when he was growing up, he didn't have really have much of anything. He didn't have what he wanted. He grew up in the slums of Hamburg, surrounded by crime and disease. His father was 17 years younger than his mom and was a bass player and worked in bars. At an early age, Brahms helped support his family by playing dance music in the waterfront bars. He kept a book propped up on the piano so he could read while he played, and when he got sleepy, the bartenders would give him drinks to keep him awake. By the time he was 15, he was making a living from music. He left Hamburg to travel as an accompanist to a famous Hungarian violinist, carrying his knapsack works of his own. Brahms was handsome when young, slender, with long straw blonde hair. He had a high voice that didn't change until he was 24. The foundation of his life was his friendship with Clara Schumann, who was 14 years older than he was. So we've talked about her. So a lot of these folks were connected. She advised him on matters large, she got jobs for him, and small, which slippers to take when he visited Hamburg. On things musical, she gave him piano lessons, and unmusical, how to invest his money. For a while, he simply sent all of it to her. She did everything she could possibly to help his career, and he wrote most of his music with her in mind. He also gave 2 years of his life to helping Schumann and her children, with housekeeping, childcare, rearranging her library of books and music. Brahms had limited education, but he was a walking encyclopedia. They wrote hundreds of letters to each other, some of which they later destroyed. Brahms wasn't an instant success as a musician. At the first performance of a concerto, on which he'd worked for 4 years, only 3 people clapped. Everyone else hissed. So hissing, again, we're looking for trends. That must have been a thing that people did back then when they didn't like something, instead of booing. But eventually his music became popular, and he was one of a few composers ever who didn't have to take another job to make a living. So he was one musician who spent less money than he earned. So that set him apart, right? With his extra money, Brahms took care of his relatives in Hamburg and any friend who needed help. His own tastes were simple in everything but music and food. He owned an expensive collection of original manuscripts by Mozart and other composers he admired. So he was sort of a collector. And Brahms loved food. The main melody of his Third Symphony came to him. He reported after a meal of fresh asparagus and champagne. When a doctor told him he had to go on a diet, he protested that he was dining with composer Johann Strauss, one of his favorite dinner companions that night. Chicken with paprika. He asked the doctor to pretend that he hadn't come to see him until the next day. Another much-loved dish was herring, and he adored eggnog. He would have 3 glasses of beer with dinner and always had coffee afterwards. There's some trends there. Some of these composers really like coffee. His table manners were not the best. For breakfast, he would eat sardines and drink the oil right from the tin. Brahms lived for 26 years in the same apartment, and every day ate at the Red Hedgehog restaurant. Later in his life, people said that Brahms, with his short legs and the huge bushy beard that became his trademark, began to resemble a hedgehog himself. Before I had my beard, I looked like Clara Schumann's son, he said. Now with it, I look like her father. A bashful man, he liked his beard because it allows me to trot about so nice and anonymously. He wore flannel shirts and short, baggy pants and often showed several inches of checkered cotton underwear. Another way you could catch a glimpse of his underwear was to watch him conduct an orchestra. He would sometimes forget to fasten his suspenders when he conducted, and he'd have to grab his pants before they'd fall down. He smoked cigars constantly and usually wore a shabby brown coat with cigar ash smudges all over, and he walked the way Beethoven did with his hands behind his back. So again, this whole smoking thing, I don't think people back then knew what we know now about it, that it's bad for you. Brahms got up every morning at 4 or 5, made his own coffee with his Viennese coffee maker, and went for a walk in the woods to hear the birds singing. He kept his pockets filled with candy and little pitchers, which he handed to the neighborhood children on his walks. Then he would go to work. Brahms worked painstakingly. His first symphony took him about 10 years to write. He prepared meticulously manuscripts, and if he wasn't completely satisfied with them, he would burn them or throw the pages into the river. It does not just come to you, Brahms would say of composing. It's torture. He often sought advice from friends, and he made friends easily. He wasn't a phony, and he couldn't tell even the smallest lie. Though he wasn't deceptive, he did work hard to charm. After an evening that Brahms spent drinking with Tchaikovsky's another famous composer from Russia, and who hated him, Tchaikovsky grudgingly admitted that Brahms, well, at least he's got a good sense of humor. Brahms could be sarcastic and domineering, and very tactless. Once he was said to have excused himself from a dinner party, saying, "I beg 1,000 pardons if there should be anyone here whom I have not insulted tonight." The one friend he never alienated was Schumann. Decorations mean nothing to me. I only want to have them. Brahms did have an ego. When he was passed over for a conducting job in Hamburg, he was bitter about it to the end of his life. He even blamed it for his failure to get married. "I would have become an orderly citizen," he mourned. But Brahms never did marry. Perhaps he liked his freedom. Perhaps other women paled next to Clara Schumann. Perhaps he had a fear of the unknown. "I cannot make up my mind to either a first opera or a first marriage," he used to like to joke. Brahms lived less than a year after Clara Schumann died. At age 64, he died of cancer of the liver. All the ships in Hamburg lowered their flags to half-mast that day. A survey of 100 musicians taken in California in 1989 ranked Brahms as the #1 favorite composer. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and if you would like, you can go to Pandora and listen to some of his music. I would suggest Brahms' Lullaby. That's one that I know if you hear it, you're going to recognize it. So until next time, bye.